All right, lads and lasses, gather round and try to imagine a world without Wi-Fi. We're going back in time, way back to the Middle Ages. Forget your smartphones, your fancy coffee machines, your Netflix binges. You're about to enter a world where the height of technology was a pointy stick and a good day meant not dying of dysentery. The Middle Ages, or as I like to call them, the Dark Ages, weren't exactly known for their creature comforts. Think less Game of Thrones glamour and more Monty Python and the Holy Grail absurdity. Bathing was considered suspicious, plumbing was practically witchcraft, and perfumes were invented to mask the overwhelming stench of, well, everything. Fasten your bodices and gird your loins because we're about to delve into the delightfully dreadful reality of the Middle Ages. Let's talk social hierarchy. Picture a pyramid. At the top, you've got your kings and queens in their castles. Below them, the nobles with their fancy titles. Now for the rest of us, the bottom 90%. If you weren't born into nobility, congrats, you're a peasant. Peasant life was as glamorous as a moldy loaf of bread. Your days were spent toiling in the fields and praying the plague didn't wipe out your village. Social mobility, forget about it. Now I know what you're thinking, but the Middle Ages had knights and castles and epic battles. It couldn't have been that bad. What you see less of are the fleas, famine, and runaway ox carts. Got a toothache? Find a blacksmith to yank it out. And don't even get me started on the Black Death. So, next time you're feeling nostalgic, remember the Middle Ages were anything but simple. Right, let's talk castles. You're probably picturing grand halls, sparkling jewels, and knights in shining armor, yeah? Well, hold on to your horses, because the reality was about as far from a Disney movie as you can get. Medieval castles were essentially giant stone refrigerators. They were freezing in the winter, damp in the spring, and stuffy as a butcher's armpit in the summer. And the smell? Let's just say Febreze wasn't exactly a hot commodity back then. Imagine this, stone walls dripping with condensation, rushes, basically straw, on the floor that absorbed everything from spilled ale to, well, chamber pot mishaps. Architectural delights, tiny windows and questionable sanitation were all the rage. Now, about those architectural marvels. The whole point of a castle was defense, right? Keep the nasty invaders out. So comfort took a backseat to things like, not getting your head chopped off. Windows were murderously small, which made the already gloomy interior about as cheerful as a dungeon. And speaking of dungeons, those were usually the most well-ventilated rooms in the castle. Ironic, isn't it? A royal pain in the moat medieval plumbing was the stuff of nightmares. Now for the piece de resistance medieval plumbing, or should I say the lack thereof. Forget your flushing toilets and hot showers, mate. In a castle, the height of luxury was a garderobe. What's a garderobe, you ask? Just a fancy word for a hole in the wall that emptied into the moat. And if you weren't lucky enough to have a garderobe, well, there was always the trusty chamber pot. The upsides of castle life, maybe. Hey, at least you were safe from the elements and some unpleasant neighbors. Okay, I'll be fair. There were a few upsides to castle life. For one, you were relatively safe from the elements, unless the roof leaked, which it often did. And you were protected from pesky things like bandits, wild animals, and your neighbor trying to borrow a cup of sugar. Plus, if you were lucky enough to be a noble, you had servants to do all the, shall we say, unpleasant tasks, like emptying chamber pots or cleaning up after the hunting dogs. All right, lads, imagine this. You're 7 years old. You're finally old enough to ditch those silly wooden toys and start your training to become a knight. Huzzah! Except, hold on a tick, this isn't some fairy tale adventure. You see, becoming a knight in the Middle Ages was less about slaying dragons and rescuing damsels, and more about, well, scrubbing chamber pots and polishing armor. You'd start your noble career as a page, which basically meant you were a glorified servant in a lord's household. Your days were filled with fetching, carrying, cleaning, and generally being at the beck and call of everyone higher up the social ladder. Ah, the joys of medieval childhood. Fast forward a few years and you've survived childhood. Congratulations, you're now a teenager. And a squire. Time to ditch the feather duster and pick up a sword, right? Well, not so fast. As a squire, you were basically your knight's personal assistant. which meant carrying his ludicrously heavy armor, tending to his wounds, hopefully not self-inflicted, and generally making sure he didn't die of dysentery or boredom before he reached the battlefield. Oh, and did I mention the training? Because there was a lot of training. We're talking hours of sword fighting, horseback riding, and hand-to-hand combat, all while wearing enough chainmail to make a suit of armor for a small rhinoceros. Think of it as medieval CrossFit, but with a higher chance of getting stabbed. Assuming you didn't succumb to the plague, a training accident, or sheer exhaustion, you might, just might, make it to knighthood by your early 20s. Now you're a real knight, with shiny armor, a fancy title, and a very real chance of getting skewered by a peasant with a pitchfork the next time some land dispute pops up. Being a knight wasn't all sunshine and roses, or should I say, mud and manure. Sure, you had some status and respect, sort of, but you were also expected to be a paragon of chivalry, which in the Middle Ages was about as common as a vegetarian butcher. And let's not forget the whole dying in battle thing, because even the best knights weren't immune to a well-aimed arrow or a stray axe blow. So there you have it, the not-so-glamorous truth about being a knight in the Middle Ages. It wasn't all jousting tournaments and rescuing fair maidens. It was hard work, constant danger, and a distinct lack of modern plumbing. But hey, at least they didn't have to deal with rush hour traffic or social media, right? Right then, let's talk about property, or more accurately, the lack of it. See, if you were a peasant, owning a castle was about as likely as finding a unicorn giving out free massages. Instead, you'd be lucky to call a one-room hut home. And when I say hut, I'm using the term loosely. Picture this: walls made of mud and whatever else you could scrounge up. A roof thatched with straw that leaked like a sieve when it rained, which was often, and a floor made of, well, more mud. Oh, and did I mention the livestock? Because you'd probably be sharing your cramped living quarters with a few chickens, a pig, maybe a goat or two if you were feeling fancy. Personal space. Forget about it, mate. You were practically sharing a bed with the livestock. Now I know you're all eager to hear about the culinary delights of peasant life. Well, prepare to be underwhelmed. Forget your fancy Michelin star restaurants and avocado toast. A peasant's diet was about as exciting as a bowl of plain oatmeal, every single day. Breakfast, gruel. Lunch, gruel but slightly warmer. Dinner, you guessed it, gruel with maybe a side of turnips if you were lucky. Meat was a rare treat, usually reserved for special occasions like, surviving another year without succumbing to the plague. Bon appetit. Section 3. Leisure activities for the dirt-covered masses. Who needs Netflix when you have pig chasing and shoulder dislocation stories? Now you might be thinking, surely peasants had some fun in their lives, right? And you'd be right, sort of. But don't go imagining medieval raves or anything. Peasant entertainment was a bit more rustic. For starters, there was always the classic chase the pig game. Just release a greased-up piglet into the village square and let the mayhem commence. Section 4. The Peasant's Guide to Time Travel. Avoid at all costs. Now I know what you're thinking. All this talk of mud, gruel, and pig chasing is making me want to hop in a time machine and experience it for myself. Well, my advice, don't. Just don't. Seriously, you think you've got it bad with your 9-to-5 job and your student loan debt? Try being a peasant in the Middle Ages, where the average life expectancy was about 30 years old. And that's if you weren't trampled by a war horse or wiped out by the plague. Trust me, the Middle Ages smelled even worse than you're imagining. Section 5. The joys of rural living, or lack thereof. Fresh air and exercise can't quite make up for the poverty and toil. Okay, I'll admit it. There were a few perks to being a peasant. For one, you were guaranteed your daily dose of fresh air and exercise, whether you wanted it or not. And you probably had a strong sense of community, what with everyone being in the same poverty-stricken boat together. But let's be real, the cons far outweighed the pros. So next time you're feeling stressed about your Wi-Fi being down, just be grateful you weren't born a peasant in the Middle Ages. Forget the roasted swans. For most, medieval food was about survival, not enjoyment. Alright lads and lasses, let's talk about everyone's favourite subject, food. Now when you think medieval cuisine, you might picture grand banquets with overflowing tables, roasted peacocks, and maybe a jester juggling apples while balancing a pie on his head. And yeah, if you were a king or a nobleman, that was probably your reality. You could afford to have exotic spices shipped in from across the globe. Your chefs could turn a simple chicken into a culinary masterpiece, and you could eat so much you practically exploded. Good times, eh? But for the other 99% of the medieval population, food wasn't about enjoyment, it was about survival. It was about cramming enough calories into your face to get through another day of back-breaking labor without passing out. So forget the fancy banquets and the roasted swans. We're about to dive into the reality of medieval cuisine for the common folk. Spoiler alert, it ain't pretty. Stale, tooth-breaking, and sometimes your only friend. Let's talk about the cornerstone of the medieval diet bread. No, not your fancy sourdough or your artisan baguettes. We're talking dense, chewy bread that could double as a weapon if you weren't careful. This wasn't your fluffy white bread either. This was brown bread, made from whatever grains were cheapest and most plentiful, usually rye or barley. And when I say stale, I mean stale, like so stale it could chip a tooth. But hey, beggars can't be choosers, and when you're a peasant struggling to feed your family, you learn to appreciate the simple things in life, like a hunk of bread that's only slightly harder than your own head. Bread was so essential that it wasn't just a food, it was a utensil. Yep, forget forks, peasants would often use chunks of bread to scoop up their stew or gruel. It was the medieval equivalent of an edible spoon, and probably about as hygienic as it sounds. When it comes to medieval recipes, what's in this was a dangerous question. Now let's move on to the main course, or what passed for a main course in the Middle Ages. Imagine a big pot bubbling over a fire, filled with a murky broth of questionable origin. That, my friends, is your medieval mystery stew. What was in this culinary masterpiece? Well, that depended on what was available. Could be some leftover vegetables, maybe a few scraps of meat if you were lucky, and a whole lot of whatever they could find growing wild in the nearby fields. Think mushrooms, roots, herbs, you know, the kind of stuff you'd normally avoid unless you were Bear Grylls. And the taste? Well, let's just say it was an acquired taste. Think bland, earthy, and probably a bit gamey if there was any meat involved. But hey, at least it was hot, filling, and unlikely to kill you. Probably. Table manners? You're having a laugh, forget forks and 5-second rules. Medieval dining was a free-for-all. Now you might be thinking, surely even in the Middle Ages people had some table manners. And you'd be right, sort of. But don't go imagining any Emily Post etiquette guides lying around. Medieval dining was a much more hands-on experience. Forks? What are those? Those pointy metal things wouldn't be a thing for centuries. Nope, people ate with their hands, and they weren't afraid to get stuck in. We're talking grabbing chunks of meat, dipping bread into communal bowls of stew, and licking their fingers with gusto. And the 5-second rule? Forget about it. More like the 5-minute rule, or maybe even the if it's still moving, it's good to eat rule. Hey, when food is scarce, you don't waste anything, even if it means risking a bit of food poisoning. Bon appetit. Or, as they probably didn't say in the Middle Ages, good luck not dying. The functional fashion show, medieval fashion, where practicality met questionable hygiene. Right, fashionistas, gather round. Forget your skinny jeans and your designer handbags. We're about to enter the glamorous world of medieval fashion. Okay, glamorous might be pushing it. Practical might be a better word. Smelly might be the most accurate. You see, in the Middle Ages, clothes weren't really about making a fashion statement. They were about survival. They were about protection from the elements, which, let's face it, were often trying to kill you. And they were about concealing the fact that you hadn't bathed in, well, possibly ever. Because, let's be honest, hygiene wasn't exactly a top priority back then. So put aside your notions of catwalks and haute couture, and embrace the practical, the functional, the downright medieval. Just try not to wrinkle your nose at the inevitable whiff of, well, let's just say medieval fashion wasn't known for its freshness. Wool is the new black, and brown, and grey. The one fabric to rule them all, for better or worse. Let's talk fabric, shall we? And when I say fabric, I pretty much mean one thing: wool. It was the denim, the cotton, the polyester of the Middle Ages. Warm, durable, and readily available. Not your soft merino wool sweaters here. Scratchy, itchy wool that could stand up on its own. But hey, it kept you warm in drafty castles and damp hovels. Absorbing, well, everything. Spilled ale, food stains, bodily fluids. Wool could handle it. Of course, it held onto those smells. Imagine a wool sweater on a rainy day. Multiply that smell by 1,000. Add wood smoke and unwashed bodies. Yep, that's medieval chic. Accessorizing with fleas and bad smells. Perfume. Because smelling like a wet dog was so last century, people tried to mask the smell with herbs and flowers. Enter perfume. Concoctions made from herbs and flowers. But perfume was expensive, so most were stuck with body odor. After a long day, you'd be ripe enough to attract flies. And let's not forget the fleas and lice. These critters were practically considered pets. Haute couture for the hygiene impaired. When your best outfit is the one the rats haven't eaten yet. For peasants, fashion was simple. Wear the same thing until it falls apart, then patch it up. Nobles had more variety and could afford fancy fabrics like silk and velvet. They loved showing off with elaborate embroidery, jewels, and pointy shoes. But even the most expensive clothes were uncomfortable, with layers of heavy wool. Imagine moving in a corset that could double as a torture device. And the chafing. At least they didn't worry about fast fashion. They had bigger things to worry about, like not dying of dysentery. Medieval resilience. Those folks were tougher than a stale loaf of bread. So, there you have it, lads and lasses, a whirlwind tour of the not-so-glamorous Middle Ages. We've explored the drafty castles, the questionable cuisine, the fashion choices that could knock you out at 20 paces. It's enough to make you want to kiss the ground beneath your feet and thank your lucky stars you were born in the 21st century, isn't it? But here's the thing. As much as we might laugh at the medieval lifestyle, and trust me, there's a lot to laugh about, we have to give those medieval folks some credit. They were tough, they were resilient, they lived in a world without antibiotics, without central heating, without indoor plumbing, and they still managed to persevere. They faced hardships and challenges that we can barely even comprehend, and they did it with a grim determination and a wry sense of humor that's hard not to admire. They were the ultimate survivors. Modern marvels, medieval mayhem. Imagine telling a peasant they could have hot water on demand. The mind boggles. Now, imagine for a moment that you could transport a medieval peasant to the present day. Imagine showing them a smartphone, a flushing toilet, a refrigerator full of food. Imagine trying to explain the concept of the internet or air travel, or a microwave oven that can cook a potato in minutes. Their heads would probably explode. Think about it. These were people who believed that diseases were caused by bad smells, who thought the earth was flat, who considered bathing a suspicious activity. Can you even begin to fathom their astonishment at the wonders of modern technology and medicine? It's a thought experiment that really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? We take so much for granted in the 21st century, things that our medieval ancestors could only have dreamed of. A toast to the toilet and other modern necessities. Let's raise a glass, not a tankard, to the wonders of the 21st century. So, let's raise a toast, shall we? Not with some lukewarm ale in a pewter tankard, but with a refreshing beverage of our choice, chilled to perfection in our modern refrigerators. Let's toast to the miracle of indoor plumbing, to the luxury of a hot shower, to the joy of a comfortable bed that's free of fleas, hopefully. Let's toast to the advances in medicine that have eradicated diseases that once ravaged entire populations. Let's toast to the technology that connects us across continents, that entertains us, that makes our lives easier in countless ways. And let's not forget to toast to the medieval folks who came before us. They may not have had it easy, but they paved the way for the comfortable, convenient, and relatively hygienic world we live in today. Cheers to that. Sure, there were castles and knights, but let's be real. Life back then was no fairy tale. It was tough, it was smelly, and it was downright dangerous, especially when it came to your health. Imagine this. You wake up one morning feeling a little worse for wear. Maybe you've got a fever, a nasty cough, or a suspicious lump in a rather unfortunate place. Fasten your bodices and grab your lucky rabbit's foot as we delve into the wacky and often terrifying world of medieval medicine. Forget those sterile white coats and fancy medical degrees. Your average medieval physician was more likely to be a monk who'd skimmed a few scrolls than a trained medical professional. Bloodletting was all the rage, regardless of your ailment. Got a headache? Drain some blood. Feeling a bit peaky? Drain some more blood. Trepanning anyone? That's drilling a hole in your skull to release those pesky evil spirits they believed caused illness. Let's be honest. Life expectancy in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly something to write home about. Between plagues, famines, and the occasional rampaging boar, reaching a ripe old age was considered a minor miracle. While it's true that surviving childhood was a feat in itself, those who made it past their early years had a fighting chance. The average lifespan might have hovered around 30 to 40 years, but that number is a bit misleading. If you were lucky enough to dodge the plague and avoid any fatal jousting accidents, you could actually live a reasonably long life for the time. Ah, leeches, those slimy little vampires of the medical world. But while we might shudder at the thought today, leeches were considered a cornerstone of medieval medicine. The medieval obsession with bloodletting stemmed from the ancient Greek theory of humours. Naturally, having too much blood was considered a surefire way to throw your system out of whack. And what better way to restore balance than by unleashing a horde of blood-sucking leeches upon the unsuspecting patient? If leeches weren't your cup of tea, medieval medicine had another, even more invasive treatment up its sleeve: trepanning. Trepanning, in the simplest terms, involved drilling a hole in the skull. The logic behind this seemingly barbaric practice was to release evil spirits, which they believed caused madness, epilepsy, and a whole host of other ailments. Surprisingly, trepanning wasn't always a death sentence. Archaeological evidence suggests that some people actually survived this rather harrowing procedure, even living for years afterward with souvenirs of the experience embedded in their skulls. From blood-sucking worms to skull-drilling shenanigans, we've covered some truly bizarre medical practices. But if you thought we were done with the weird and wacky world of medieval remedies, think again, because now we're talking pigeons. Yes, pigeons. Believe it or not, applying a freshly slaughtered pigeon to a wound or ailment was considered a viable treatment for a range of conditions. The idea was that the vital heat of the bird would somehow draw out the illness. In the medieval world, religion and medicine were deeply intertwined. In the Middle Ages, your best bet for medical attention was often a monastery infirmary. Monks, with their access to ancient texts and their dedication to a life of service, became the de facto doctors of their time. Their medical knowledge was largely based on the teachings of ancient Greek physicians like Galen and Hippocrates, often filtered through a lens of religious dogma. While they might not have always had the right answers, they did genuinely try to ease suffering and provide comfort to the sick. Imagine a world where your personality, your health, even your fashion sense were all dictated by 4 bodily fluids. Welcome to the wonderful world of humorism, the dominant medical theory of the Middle Ages. According to this theory, the human body contained 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, choler, and black bile, melancholy. Each humour was associated with certain qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry, and an imbalance in these humours was believed to be the root cause of all illnesses. Too much blood, and you were considered sanguine, cheerful, optimistic, and probably a bit too fond of red velvet. So, you've been diagnosed with an excess of black bile. What's a medieval patient to do? According to the principles of humorism, the key to restoring health was to rebalance those pesky humours. Bloodletting, as we've already discussed, was a firm favourite. Purging, induced by vomiting or enemas, was another popular option for expelling those troublesome humours. And of course, leeches, those ever-reliable bloodsuckers, were always on hand to lend their services. So, you've tried leeches, trepanning, maybe even a pigeon poultice or two, and you're still feeling worse for wear. Where do you turn when all else fails? Well, in the medieval world, you might find yourself at the doorstep of a hospital. Medieval hospitals were a far cry from their modern counterparts. Often run by religious orders, these institutions were more about providing comfort and spiritual solace than offering cutting-edge medical treatments. Think of them less as hospitals and more as places of refuge for the sick, poor, and dying. In the medieval mindset, illness was often seen as both a physical and spiritual affliction. Sin, in particular, was believed to play a significant role in causing disease. So, it's not surprising that medieval hospitals placed a strong emphasis on prayer, penance, and spiritual cleansing as part of the healing process. Patients were often encouraged to confess their sins to a priest, believing that seeking forgiveness from God was essential for recovery. Whether or not it actually cured their ailments is debatable, but it likely offered a sense of comfort and hope in a time when both were in short supply. Now, we've talked about leeches, trepanning, and the power of prayer. But what about actual medical treatments? Surely medieval hospitals had something more tangible to offer their patients than just confessions and bloodletting? Well, yes and no. While their understanding of anatomy and disease might have been somewhat limited, medieval physicians weren't entirely clueless. One particularly curious cure that saw widespread use was wine. Wine, depending on its type and preparation, was believed to have various properties that could help balance those pesky bodily fluids. Okay, let's talk hygiene, or rather, the distinct lack thereof in the medieval world. Public bathhouses did exist, and in the early Middle Ages they were surprisingly popular. However, as time went on, and the plague decided to make regular appearances, bathhouses gained a bit of a bad reputation. With no concept of germ theory, people happily shared bathwater, spreading more than just rumors. It's no wonder that by the late Middle Ages, baths were viewed with suspicion, associated with disease and immorality. Let's move on to dental hygiene, or the lack thereof. Forget your fancy electric toothbrushes and fluoride-infused mouthwash. Medieval people relied on more natural methods to keep their pearly whites, well, not so pearly white. Some resorted to chewing on herbs like mint and parsley to freshen their breath, while others used rough cloths dipped in salt or vinegar to scrub away at stubborn food particles. Charcoal, with its absorbent properties, was another popular choice, though it probably did more to blacken their teeth than actually clean them. And if you had a toothache, barbers often doubled as dentists, performing extractions with pliers and a prayer. You'd think that in a world without indoor plumbing, clean, drinkable water would be a top priority, but alas, medieval people had a rather complicated relationship with H2O. Clean water sources were hard to come by, and those that did exist were often contaminated by sewage, animal waste, and a whole host of other nasties. So, what was the solution to this watery dilemma? Ale, of course. The fermentation process killed off some of the harmful bacteria, making it a surprisingly sensible if somewhat boozy alternative. Imagine a world where a simple sneeze could be a death sentence, not because of a deadly virus, but because you might have just expelled your soul into the ether. That was the reality for our medieval ancestors, who lived in a world shrouded in superstition and fear, where illness was often seen as a punishment from God, a curse from a witch, or the result of some cosmic imbalance. Forget germ theory and bacteria. In the medieval mind, disease was often attributed to bad air or miasma, a foul-smelling fog believed to carry illness. People went to great lengths to avoid these noxious fumes, carrying posies of flowers, burning incense, and even wearing those iconic beak-like masks stuffed with aromatic herbs. When bad smells weren't to blame, there were always supernatural culprits to consider. Witches, with their supposed powers to curse and blight, were often blamed for outbreaks of illness, crop failures, and even just a particularly bad batch of ale. And if it wasn't a witch's curse, it was divine retribution for sins real or imagined. In a world dominated by religion, illness was often seen as a test of faith, a punishment for transgressions, or a way for God to humble even the most pious among them. In their quest for cures, medieval people didn't just look to earthly remedies, they also turned their gaze to the heavens. Astrology, the belief that the movements of celestial bodies could influence human affairs, played a surprisingly significant role in medieval medicine. Physicians, often well-versed in astrology, would consult complex charts and diagrams, seeking guidance from the stars to diagnose and treat their patients. Each sign of the zodiac was associated with different parts of the body, and the alignment of planets at the time of a person's birth or the onset of their illness was believed to hold clues to their affliction and potential cures. Bloodletting, for example, was often timed to coincide with specific phases of the moon, as certain astrological alignments were believed to enhance or diminish the procedure's effectiveness. Similarly, herbal remedies were chosen not just for their medicinal properties, but also for their supposed astrological correspondences. While astrology might seem like an odd bedfellow for medicine today, it's important to remember that for medieval people, the universe was an interconnected web, and the celestial realm held a powerful sway over earthly matters, including health and well-being. Section 3. Superstition versus science, a recipe for a short life expectancy. Medieval medical practices often seem absurd and barbaric, drilling holes in skulls to release evil spirits, applying pigeon carcasses to plague sores, drinking ale instead of water. These were people doing their best with the knowledge they had. They sought ways to alleviate suffering in a world of constant companions. Many beliefs were ineffective and harmful. Bloodletting weakened patients already struggling to survive. Lack of hygiene spread diseases like the plague. Appreciate how far we've come from those days of bloodletting and pigeon poultices. From leeches to life-saving treatments, we've come a long way, baby. From bloodletting with leeches to drilling holes in skulls, our ancestors endured bizarre treatments. Imagine explaining to a medieval physician that we can now prevent deadly diseases with tiny injections, perform surgery with lasers, and even transplant organs. They would likely hail us as miracle workers or brand us as witches. The journey from medical superstition to evidence-based medicine is a testament to human ingenuity. We've replaced the four humors with a deep understanding of anatomy, swapped astrological charts for microscopes and MRI machines, and traded pigeon poultices for antibiotics. Let's raise a glass to the scientists and doctors who've paved the way for our healthier lives. Section 2. The enduring allure of medieval medicine. Why we're still fascinated. It's easy to scoff at the seemingly absurd practices of medieval medicine, but there's something undeniably captivating about this era of bloodletting, humors, and astrological diagnoses. Why, centuries later, are we still so drawn to this world of leeches and trepanning? Perhaps it's the sheer alienness of it all. The medieval mindset, so different from our own, offers a glimpse into a world where superstition and faith intertwined with every aspect of life, including health and healing. It's a stark reminder of how far we've come in our understanding of the human body and the world around us. Or maybe it's the enduring power of storytelling. Medieval medicine, with its tales of plague doctors, wise women, and miraculous cures, provides fertile ground for historical fiction, fantasy novels, and even video games. These stories, while often romanticized, offer a glimpse into a time of great upheaval and change, where life was often brutal, but also full of wonder and mystery. Whatever the reason, our fascination with medieval medicine endures. It's a reminder that the past, while often messy and misguided, can teach us valuable lessons about ourselves, our world, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Section 3. Lessons from the past. Appreciating the miracle of modern healthcare. As we've delved into the often bizarre world of medieval medicine, it's hard not to feel a sense of gratitude for the incredible advancements in healthcare that we benefit from today. We live in an era where a simple course of antibiotics can cure infections that once spelled certain death, where vaccines protect us from diseases that ravaged entire populations, and where surgical procedures that were once unthinkable are now routine. It's easy to take these advancements for granted, to complain about long wait times or the high cost of prescription drugs. But it's important to remember that these inconveniences pale in comparison to the realities faced by our medieval ancestors, who lived in a world where a simple cut could turn fatal and a broken bone could lead to a lifetime of disability. The next time you visit your doctor, take a moment to appreciate the incredible knowledge, skill, and dedication of the healthcare professionals who care for you. We've come a long way from the days of leeches and pigeon poultices, but our journey towards a healthier future is far from over. Let's dive into the wild, wacky world of medieval entertainment. Now, without TikTok, Netflix, or even printed books, folks back then had to get creative. They had to come up with their own ways to pass the time and have fun. First up, let's talk bear baiting. Yes, it's as horrifying as it sounds. Picture this: a bear chained to a post and a pack of dogs set loose to attack it. People gathered around, cheering and placing bets. Not exactly a cozy movie night, but it was a popular form of entertainment, drawing large crowds who were eager to see the spectacle. Next in line for medieval fun, public executions. Nothing says family outing like watching a criminal get hanged, drawn, or quartered. It was the medieval version of a blockbuster, attracting crowds from all over. People would travel from neighboring villages just to witness the event. But it wasn't all blood and guts. Enter the Morris dancers. These folks would jingle, jump, and jive around, waving sticks and hankies. Imagine trying to avoid stepping in something unpleasant while doing that. Their performances were lively and colourful, bringing joy and laughter to the crowds. And for the knights in shining armour, we had tournaments, rich guys bashing each other with lances and swords for prizes, and sometimes an accidental death. Talk about high-stakes entertainment. These tournaments were grand events, often held in large arenas with spectators cheering for their favorite knights. Now let's shift gears to the peasants. Their entertainment was simpler but no less fun. Village fairs were the highlight of the year. Think sack races where people hopped around in sacks like oversized potato bugs. Ever tried climbing a greased pole? Medieval peasants did. The challenge was to shimmy your way up without slipping off and breaking your neck. The prize? Bragging rights and maybe a few coins. These simple yet challenging games brought the community together and provided a much-needed break from their daily routines. And let's not forget the best turnip awards. Villagers would bring their plumpest, most perfect turnips to be judged. The winner got the honor of being the turnip king or queen for a day. Oh, and gossip. Nothing traveled faster in a medieval village than a juicy scandal. Gossip was a form of entertainment in itself, with villagers eagerly sharing the latest news and rumors. Imagine the talk when word got out about the blacksmith's daughter and the goat. Scandals like these would be the talk of the village for weeks, providing endless amusement for the locals. So there you have it. From bear baiting to turnip tossing, medieval entertainment was as diverse as it was eccentric. It shows just how inventive people can get when they have to entertain themselves. Jesters, with their colorful costumes and witty jokes, were also a common sight, providing laughter and amusement to both the nobility and the common folk. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more medieval madness. Catch you next time, fellow time travelers. Until then, keep imagining the wild and wonderful world of medieval entertainment. Alright, history buffs, buckle up. We're about to dive into one of the most infamous periods in human history. If you lived through the 14th century, congratulations. You probably didn't. The era was marked by one of the deadliest pandemics ever recorded. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, was a nightmare, wiping out a third to half of Europe's population in just a few years. It spread like wildfire, leaving devastation in its wake. Imagine waking up with huge, painful lumps called buboes, a raging fever, and then, well, rapid death. The symptoms were terrifying and the disease was relentless. Sounds like a fun time, right? The fear and panic were palpable, and society was thrown into chaos. So what were the medieval solutions? Medicine was primitive. An understanding of disease was even more so. Whipping yourself in public to show God you were sorry. Blaming your neighbors. Burning everything. People were desperate and turned to extreme measures. And let's not forget those creepy-beaked plague masks doctors wore, stuffed with flowers to avoid the bad air, because they believed smells caused the disease. Spoiler, they didn't. Rats and fleas did. The masks, though eerie, became an iconic symbol of the time. But hey, at least those masks looked super metal. They've even inspired modern-day Halloween costumes and heavy metal album covers. While all this chaos was happening, peasants were trying to carry on. Farming, gossiping, dying, and believe it or not, sometimes celebrating surviving another week. Life had to go on, even in the face of such overwhelming odds. They'd steal bread and basically invent very early versions of punk rock. Acts of rebellion and defiance were common as people tried to find some semblance of normalcy. So, next time you think your week's been rough, just remember, at least you're not partying like it's 1347. The resilience of people during this time is a testament to the human spirit. Medieval history, folks, it's wild. The stories from this era are both horrifying and fascinating, offering a glimpse into the resilience and ingenuity of our ancestors. The bizarre lives of medieval lords and ladies, and the superstitions that kept everyone on their toes. Because let's be real, life back then wasn't all shining armor and noble quests. Imagine a world without antibiotics, the internet, or even decent plumbing. Now throw in some really questionable hygiene, a dash of political intrigue that would make Machiavelli blush, and a whole lot of belief in magic, and you start to get the picture. We often romanticize the medieval era, with its knights and castles, but the reality was often much more complicated, and let's be honest, kind of gross. We're talking about a time when a king could be considered a genius if he could read, and bathing more than once a month was considered excessive. So, buckle up, history fans, because today we're separating fact from fiction and exploring the lives of the people who ruled the medieval world and the strange beliefs that shaped their reality. Okay, so you're a medieval lord. You've got a fancy title, a big castle, and more land than you can shake a jousting stick at. Life is good, right? Well, not so fast. Sure, being a lord or lady came with its perks. You got to eat fancy food, wear luxurious clothes, and throw lavish parties where everyone had to be nice to you, or at least pretend to be. But beneath all the velvet and furs, life for the medieval elite was often more about survival than luxury. Let's start with the obvious: education. Now, when I say education, I'm not talking about dissecting Aristotle or debating the finer points of philosophy. For most lords, education meant learning how to swing a sword, ride a horse, and maybe, just maybe, memorize a few Bible verses. You know, the ones about obeying your Lord and paying your taxes on time. Critical thinking? Not so much. This lack of, shall we say, intellectual curiosity led to some pretty interesting decision-making. Take castle construction, for example. You'd think that someone building a giant stone fortress would prioritize things like, I don't know, a reliable water supply or a sewage system that didn't involve tossing your waste out the window. But nope. Many castles were architectural marvels, but also incredibly uncomfortable and sometimes downright dangerous places to live. And then there was the whole cousin marrying thing. Now I get it. Marrying off your kids to relatives was a great way to keep power consolidated and prevent your enemies from getting their grubby hands on your land. But from a genetic standpoint, let's just say it wasn't the best idea. But hey, who needs healthy heirs when you've got a coat of arms and a bloodline that supposedly goes back to Charlemagne, right? The ladies, on the other hand, had their own set of challenges. Sure, they might have had servants to do their bidding, but their lives were largely confined to the domestic sphere. Sewing, praying, managing the household, and popping out heirs like a medieval baby factory, that was the name of the game. And let's not forget about childbirth in the Middle Ages. With no pain relief and a mortality rate that would make even the bravest warrior tremble, becoming a mother was a risky business, but it wasn't all bad. Court life, for both men and women, was a whirlwind of social events, feasts, and political maneuvering. Think Game of Thrones, but with slightly less incest and dragonfire. Alliances were forged and broken over banquets, rumors spread like wildfire through the castle corridors, and everyone was always vying for the king's favor, or at least trying to avoid his disfavor, which could be fatal. So, while the life of a medieval lord and lady might seem glamorous from a distance, the reality was a lot more complicated. It was a world of immense power and unimaginable privilege, but also one of constant danger, political intrigue, and well, let's just say they didn't have Febreze back then. Okay, imagine a world without science as we know it. No microscopes to reveal tiny bacteria, no telescopes to explore the vastness of space, no understanding of germ theory or the laws of physics. Now imagine trying to make sense of the world around you, to explain the unexplainable, to find meaning in the chaos. That was the reality for people in the Middle Ages. In this world of uncertainty, superstition reigned supreme. Natural events that we might consider commonplace, a thunderstorm, a comet streaking across the sky, a particularly harsh winter, were seen as omens, portents of good or evil, and more often than not, evil. Let's start with comets. These celestial wanderers, with their fiery tails and unpredictable appearances, were often seen as harbingers of doom. War, famine, plague, you name it. A comet probably got blamed for it at some point. After all, if God was trying to send you a message, what better way to do it than with a giant flaming ball of ice and dust hurtling through the heavens? Subtlety wasn't really the medieval way. And then there were the more everyday superstitions. Sneezing, for example, wasn't just a sign of a cold. It was a potential escape route for your soul. Hence the tradition of saying bless you, a verbal attempt to stuff that soul right back into your body where it belonged. Witches, of course, were everywhere, at least in the medieval imagination. They could ruin your crops with a glance, turn your milk sour with a whisper, and steal your baby's breath while you slept. Basically, if something bad happened, there was a good chance a witch was to blame. Black cats, those furry familiars of darkness, were also viewed with suspicion. They were agents of Satan, omens of bad luck, and generally up to no good, unless, of course, they were really good at catching mice, in which case their satanic connections could be overlooked. Hey, even in the Middle Ages, practicality had its place. And let's not forget about the power of the evil eye. A jealous neighbor, a disgruntled peasant, even a passing stranger could, with a single envious glance, bring misfortune upon you and your family. The solution? Amulets, charms, and a whole lot of praying. In a world where so much was beyond their control, people clung to these superstitions like life rafts in a storm. They provided a sense of order, a way to explain the unexplainable, and perhaps most importantly, a way to feel like they had some agency, however small, in a world that often felt capricious and cruel. So the next time you see a comet or a black cat crosses your path, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come in our understanding of the world. And maybe say a little thank you to science, because while superstitions might be fun to think about, I, for one, am glad we live in a world where a sneeze is just a sneeze and not a potential soul-stealing event. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into medieval madness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more historical hilarity. We've explored the lives of lords and ladies, debunked some historical myths, and delved into the weird and wonderful world of medieval superstitions. But most importantly, we've learned that while life in the Middle Ages might have been very different from our own, it was never short on drama, intrigue, and the occasional bout of absurdity. We're going to shatter some romanticized myths and give you a real look at what life was like back then. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all knights and fair maidens. We've all seen the movies. Sweeping romances, epic battles, and people bursting into spontaneous song about their undying love. But what was life really like for the average Joe, or should I say the average Jeffrey, in medieval times? Buckle up, my friends, because we're about to explore the nitty-gritty, the smelly, and the downright bizarre reality of medieval marriage, food, work, and even law and order. All right, let's talk about love, or rather, the distinct lack of it when it came to medieval marriage. Forget about romantic walks in the forest or stolen glances across a crowded room. Marriage in medieval times was about as romantic as a tax audit. For the rich and powerful, marriage was a strategic power move, a merger, an acquisition. We're talking land, titles, and political alliances, people. Love? A pleasant bonus at best. Imagine being a 12-year-old noblewoman told, "Congratulations! You're marrying Lord Bartholomew, who's, let's just say, 3 times your age and has a fondness for hunting squirrels, with a battle axe." Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, is it? And for the average peasant family? Forget about love, we're talking survival. Marrying off your daughter to the guy with a slightly less leaky roof and a cow who gives more than a thimbleful of milk was considered a major win. Courtship probably involved a lot of grunting and pointing at livestock. You, me, goat, marriage, good deal? Now I know what you're thinking, but John, what about love? Surely people fell in love back then, and yes, of course they did. Humans are wired for connection, but love was not the driving force behind marriage. It was something that, with luck, might grow over time, between tending to chickens and avoiding the plague. And divorce? Ha, good luck with that. Unless your spouse was caught in bed with a demon, and you had witnesses, you were pretty much stuck. Annulments were possible, but mostly for the rich and well-connected, and even then, it was more difficult than getting a refund from a medieval blacksmith after he accidentally shod your horse with a horseshoe 3 sizes too small. So, yeah, medieval marriage wasn't exactly a romantic fairy tale. It was more like, you have a pulse? Great! Let's get hitched and try not to die of dysentery before our next harvest. Okay, let's move on to something we can all relate to, food. And by relate to, I mean be incredibly grateful we have refrigerators and food safety regulations. If you were a king or a queen, or even just a minor noble hanging onto your lands, congratulations. You probably ate pretty well. Think roast meats, fancy pies with hidden birds inside, because why not? And enough wine to make a modern-day frat party blush. Your biggest worry was getting gout from all the rich food. But if you were a peasant, which, let's be honest, most people were, your diet was, well, let's just say, it was less Game of Thrones feast and more game you found in the woods, hopefully before it started to decompose. The cornerstone of the peasant diet was pottage. Now, pottage sounds kind of cute, doesn't it? Like something you'd eat by the fireplace while wearing a hand-knitted sweater. Don't be fooled. Pottage was basically a thick stew made from whatever they could scrounge up. Grains, vegetables if they were lucky, maybe some questionable meat if they were feeling adventurous. Bread was the other staple, and I'm not talking about your artisanal sourdough with the fancy crust. This was dense brown bread, so hard it could probably chip a tooth. White bread, that was for the wealthy, a symbol of their elevated status. Fresh fruit? Only when in season, and even then, it was treated with suspicion, like it might try to steal your soul. Spices? Forget about it. Those were worth their weight in gold and reserved for the elite. Sugar, practically unheard of. So, yeah, medieval cuisine wasn't exactly a culinary adventure. It was more about survival. Medieval 9 to 5, more like dawn to dusk with extra mud. So you're married, you've managed to choke down some pottage without chipping a tooth. Congratulations. Now it's time to get to work. And by work, I mean back-breaking, soul-crushing labor from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week. For the vast majority of people in medieval times, life revolved around agriculture. We're talking ploughing fields with oxen who seemed to take a personal offense to your existence, harvesting crops until the sun turned you into a prune, and praying to every saint in the book that your crops didn't fail, because then it was starvation time. And if you weren't a farmer, you were probably an artisan, which sounds way more glamorous than it was. Blacksmiths, millers, coopers, these were essential jobs, but they were tough, often dangerous, and definitely didn't come with dental. And let's not forget about taxes. Because even in medieval times, the taxman always came knocking, usually in the form of a grumpy lord demanding his cut of your meager harvest. Sundays were supposed to be a day of rest, a chance to go to church and thank whatever higher power was listening that you hadn't succumbed to the plague yet. But let's be real. After church, it was probably back to work, tending to the animals, mending fences, and generally trying to stay one step ahead of utter destitution. There were no unions, no minimum wage, no OSHA regulations to protect you from falling into a vat of molten metal. Oops. Just you, your aching muscles, and the knowledge that this was your lot in life. Medieval justice. Don't get caught. Or do. It's all pretty entertaining. Okay, so we've covered marriage, food, and work. Let's wrap up with everyone's favorite topic, crime and punishment. And by favorite, I mean terrifyingly arbitrary and often based on superstition and hearsay. Now, when we think of medieval law enforcement, we tend to picture knights in shining armor, upholding justice with fairness and chivalry. But in reality, medieval justice was about as subtle as a headbutt from a drunken Viking. Stealing a loaf of bread? Prepare to lose a hand. Accused of witchcraft because your neighbor's cow stopped producing milk? Get ready for a trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal was basically medieval society's way of saying, we don't have any actual evidence, so let's just ask God to decide. And how did they ask God? By subjecting the accused to ridiculous and often deadly trials. Trial by water was a classic. They'd tie you up and chuck you into a river or pond. If you sank, innocent, but also dead. If you floated, guilty. And probably also dead after they fished you out and decided to burn you at the stake just to be sure. Then there was trial by hot iron, where you had to carry a red-hot iron bar for a certain distance, or trial by fire, where you had to walk barefoot over burning coals. And if you were really lucky, you might get trial by combat, where you got to fight your accuser to the death. Justice was swift, brutal, and often decided by who had the strongest stomach or the highest pain tolerance. And that's medieval history, baby. So there you have it. A glimpse into the gritty, unromanticized reality of medieval life. It was a time of hard work, even harder bread, and a justice system that seemed to have been designed by a committee of sadists with a penchant for the dramatic. But hey, at least they didn't have to deal with rush hour traffic or internet outages, right? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more historical deep dives. Thanks for watching.